You didn't even invite me to my own birthday dinner," I muttered under my breath as I stepped into the dining room. The warm glow of the chandelier highlighting the polished oak table set for 8, yet the seats were eerily empty, save for the faint sparkle of the silverware that reflected the soft light. I had spent hours earlier that afternoon dusting the living room, arranging fresh tulips in the crystal vase, and choosing my sky blue dress that I knew David and Olivia always complimented me on during family gatherings, the scent of vanilla and cinnamon from the baked apple pie lingering in the air. The moment I set foot in the room, a strange quiet settled over me, as if the house itself was holding its breath, and I couldn't help but notice the faint tension in the shadows along the walls, the way Claire lingered near the doorway, pretending to examine the painting while sneaking glances at her mother. I placed the pie on the table, adjusting the plates carefully, my hands steady, my mind racing through the evening's timeline, wondering why nothing felt right. I heard the faint clink of a fork in the kitchen, but no one called out, no laughter, no greetings, just a hollow echo where family chatter should have been, and the emptiness made my chest tighten slightly as I took a seat at the head of the table. I imagined Michael arriving with his usual jovial smile, Olivia bringing in the sparkling cider, the children chattering about their day, but none of that happened. The silence was absolute, punctuated only by the subtle hum of the air conditioner and the ticking of the antique wall clock. I set down my hands on the table, feeling the polished surface smooth beneath my fingers, trying to hold on to a sense of normalcy as I glanced at the untouched chairs, my gaze lingering on the place where Michael's spot should have been, imagining the conversations that might have taken place, the laughter I was missing, and the gradual sinking feeling that this was not a simple oversight, but something deliberate, orchestrated beyond my understanding. The aroma of the pie mingled with the faint traces of lavender from the candles, a careful juxtaposition of warmth and stillness that only made the emptiness more pronounced, and I caught myself rehearsing the questions I would ask, though there was no one to answer them yet. The words trapped in my mind like leaves swirling in a quiet wind, while the subtle tension in the air grew heavier with each passing moment. I let my hands rest lightly on the table, tracing the rim of the china plate, the gold trim catching the light, as I silently observed every corner of the room, noting the slight misalignment of the centerpiece, the gentle flutter of the curtains from the evening breeze, and the way the shadows pooled beneath the chairs, as if the house itself was reminding me of all the moments I had faithfully prepared for this family, the sacrifices I had quietly made, the dinners cooked, the holidays celebrated, the milestones celebrated, and now the realization that even in a moment that should have been purely mine, there was an absence, a concealment, a hidden tension I could not yet name. My mind wandered briefly to the earlier phone calls, the polite, "I can't make it" messages that had been sent days before, yet I could still feel a subtle gnawing doubt that something larger was at play, and I let my eyes settle on the folded napkins, the untouched glasses, the faint reflection of myself in the polished surface of the table, thinking that tonight would not be just a birthday, but a revelation, a quiet unmasking of truths long kept in shadow, while the soft clinking of silver in the empty room seemed to echo the unspoken words of a family hiding more than just a simple oversight, and I drew in a slow breath, feeling the weight of anticipation, of silent observation, of the careful patience I would need to understand the depth of the secret. As I adjusted the chair slightly, the scent of the pie reminding me of all the small details I had controlled, all the care I had taken, and yet now the air itself seemed charged with a subtle menace, an unspoken challenge that, tonight, in the warm glow of my own birthday dinner, I would confront more than absence. I would confront the truth hidden in plain sight. The evening sun had slipped behind the trees outside, casting long shadows. Across the living room where Margaret sat quietly on the edge of the sofa, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she traced the seams of the upholstery with her fingertips, noticing every tiny imperfection and every flicker of movement. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside filled the pauses in her thoughts, creating a rhythm that contrasted sharply with the storm of unease building in her mind. She could hear the soft padding of Claire moving about in the kitchen, the delicate clatter of a spoon against a mixing bowl, the subtle scrape of a chair as Olivia shifted her weight without looking directly at her. Margaret kept her expression calm, controlled, as she observed the interactions between her family members, noting the slightly forced laughter, the careful turns of conversation, the half-smiles that did not reach the eyes. Every detail was recorded silently, catalogued in her memory, as if she were a careful archivist of subtle betrayals. The aroma of roasted chicken and baked vegetables drifted from the kitchen, a reminder of the care she had taken to ensure that everything was prepared with love and precision, yet the atmosphere remained cold, tense, and somehow deliberate. She allowed her gaze to settle on the polished wood of the coffee table, noticing the glint of light on the glass coasters, the faint scratches that bore witness to years of family use. Each mark a small testament to moments that had once been filled with laughter and warmth. As she took a slow, deliberate breath, she reminded herself of the countless evenings she had orchestrated family meals, each one meticulously planned, each one a stage for connection and celebration, only to feel the creeping awareness that this evening carried a different script, one in which her presence was acknowledged but not valued. Margaret shifted slightly, the fabric of her dress brushing against the sofa as she leaned forward just enough to watch Olivia hand Claire a dish with a precise smile that seemed rehearsed, as if the motions themselves were a form of silent instruction, teaching the younger girl the art of appearances. The corners of her mouth lifted in a faint, imperceptible line, a subtle mask for the storm beneath, as she considered the layers of etiquette, of social maneuvering, of careful concealment that were being employed around her, and how effortlessly the family had created a performance in which she was both observer and unacknowledged participant. Her mind wandered briefly to earlier moments in the day. The careful arrangements of flowers, the freshly polished silverware, the gentle hum of the music that she had selected to create a welcoming environment, and how all of that had been met with a polite nod, a murmured thank you, and nothing more, leaving a quiet ache in the spaces where warmth should have been. She adjusted her position slightly, letting her hands rest lightly on her knees, her eyes scanning for the smallest telltale gesture, a glance, a twitch, a hesitation that might hint at the undercurrents she had begun to sense, the patterns of avoidance, the subtle prioritization of convenience over consideration, and the delicate choreography that had turned a family gathering into a landscape of observation and quiet reflection. As the evening deepened, the shadows grew longer, and the warm light of the chandelier created pools of illumination that highlighted the deliberate separations, the spacing of chairs, the way hands did not meet, eyes did not linger, voices did not soften. Margaret's breathing remained steady, measured, a quiet rhythm that mirrored the patience she was cultivating, the careful gathering of information and insight, as she prepared herself for the revelation that she knew was emerging, each passing moment revealing a layer of truth hidden beneath ordinary gestures, familiar smiles, and the carefully constructed civility that masked the intentions she was only beginning to understand. The kitchen timer clicked softly, marking intervals in the stillness, and she noticed Olivia's fleeting glance toward the oven, the brief flash of a smile that did not reach her eyes, and Margaret catalogued it all, storing every small detail in the quiet ledger of her mind, aware that tonight was as much about observation as it was about presence, that the patterns she saw would form the foundation for understanding the unspoken dynamics of her family, and she remained poised, calm, and silently vigilant, her gaze steady as she anticipated the moment when all the small clues would coalesce into a clear picture of the hidden truths she had sensed from the very beginning of this carefully staged evening. Margaret sipped her sparkling cider slowly, letting the bubbles tickle her tongue as she observed the subtle choreography unfolding around her, noticing the careful way Olivia arranged the plates while Claire carried the salad with measured precision, as if every movement had been rehearsed to project normalcy while concealing the unease beneath. The ambient lighting highlighted the contrast between the bright china and the somber expressions that occasionally flickered across David and Olivia's faces, a silent language Margaret was beginning to decipher. Each glance, each half-smile, each pause in conversation was catalogued with meticulous attention, revealing small inconsistencies in the narrative the family presented, the invisible threads connecting actions to intentions she had started to sense. Margaret recalled the mornings she had spent baking muffins for school lunches, the afternoons spent arranging birthday parties and family dinners, The countless evenings spent listening, advising, and smoothing over disagreements, realizing that those efforts had been met with gratitude only in appearance, never in genuine acknowledgement. She leaned back slightly, allowing herself to watch rather than engage, her eyes tracing the lines of the room, the placement of the chairs, the empty spaces where a joke or comment should have landed but had not. The faint sound of Claire's fork tapping against the salad bowl drew her attention, a rhythmic signal that contrasted with the quiet tension, and Margaret understood that tonight was less about the meal and more about observation, an exercise in awareness and patience. She noted the way Olivia's eyes flicked toward the oven occasionally, the slight tension in David's jaw as he responded to questions with measured politeness, each moment revealing a careful balance of concealment and control. Margaret allowed a subtle smile to touch her lips, not for amusement, but as a signal to herself of the calm she maintained, the silent authority of experience and insight, as she considered the many layers of family dynamics, the unspoken rules, and the hidden priorities that had guided interactions for years. She traced the pattern of the rug with her gaze, the intricate floral design mirroring the complexities of the evening, and she recognized that the small betrayals and omissions she had begun to notice were part of a larger, deliberate structure, a careful alignment of behavior meant to mask truths from her view. Each detail, from the positioning of the napkins to the way the candlelight danced across the polished surfaces, contributed to a mosaic of subtle signals that Margaret was slowly interpreting, turning observation into knowledge. She felt the weight of the evening settle over her, a quiet understanding that patience and careful attention would reveal the contours of the hidden reality, and that her role was not to react immediately, but to absorb, process, and prepare. The faint ticking of the wall clock punctuated the silence, a reminder that time itself was an ally, allowing her to witness patterns and repetitions. And as she shifted her posture to adjust the sleeve of her dress, she acknowledged the clarity that came with distance, the insight gained from calm observation, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had the presence and awareness to see through the delicate performances surrounding her, capturing the subtle truths that others sought to conceal with practiced ease, all while maintaining her composure, dignity, and the steady patience that would guide her through the revelations yet to come. Margaret allowed her mind to drift back through the years as she observed the faint shifts of expression on David and Olivia's faces, remembering the countless afternoons spent preparing holiday dinners, arranging birthday surprises, and quietly mending small disputes that could have escalated, the moments when laughter and warmth had filled the same rooms that now seemed distant and calculated. She reflected on the letters and cards she had kept, the photographs tucked carefully into albums, each one a testament to her care and attention, and she realized that the consistency of her presence had become invisible, taken for granted, a backdrop against which others pursued their own interests without acknowledgement. The polished silver of the cutlery glinted in the soft light of the chandelier, a quiet reminder of the effort she had invested to create a welcoming atmosphere. And yet tonight, even as the scents of roast vegetables and fresh bread filled the room, there was a subtle coldness in the air, a tension she could feel pressing gently against her chest, urging caution and attentiveness. Every slight movement, every pause in conversation, and every fleeting glance carried information, and Margaret noted each with meticulous care, understanding that the nuances of body language and tone could reveal intentions that words might conceal. She considered the many dinners she had hosted, the hours spent in kitchens with the oven warm and timers ticking, the small attentions paid to preferences and habits, all to ensure that family gatherings ran smoothly, and contrasted it with the silence and careful calculation she now witnessed, realizing that the balance of care had shifted over time, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but unmistakably. The soft clatter of a napkin being folded, the brief flicker of a smile that did not reach the eyes, the quiet movements of Claire arranging the plates, all created a pattern that Margaret cataloged silently, each action and reaction building a mosaic of insight and awareness. She let herself acknowledge the sense of displacement, the quiet sting of recognition that her efforts and devotion had not been fully appreciated, yet she maintained a calm exterior, allowing her inner observations to guide her understanding while refraining from overt expression of disappointment. Margaret traced the rim of her glass with a fingertip, listening to the subtle sounds of her surroundings, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the antique clock, and the soft whispers of conversation that did not include her in the way it once had, and she recognized the familiar pattern of careful management and subtle avoidance that had developed over time, the invisible structures through which family dynamics had been rearranged without her notice. She inhaled slowly, the scent of baked bread mingling with the faint floral notes from the centerpiece, allowing herself to center her thoughts, observing the details and holding them in memory, knowing that the clarity of perception and the measured patience she exercised in these moments would form the foundation for understanding the underlying truths of the evening. Each small shift, each deliberate pause, each carefully constructed gesture became part of a larger picture that Margaret was piecing together in quiet contemplation. And as the evening deepened and shadows stretched across the room, she remained attentive, poised, and internally alert, recognizing that awareness and patience were her most powerful tools in discerning the full nature of the hidden intentions surrounding her, all while maintaining the dignity, composure, and quiet authority that had long defined her presence within the family. Margaret noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere as Claire excused herself to the kitchen, leaving David and Olivia momentarily alone at the table, their conversation dropping to a low murmur that carried just enough for her to catch fragments, phrases that hinted at decisions made without her knowledge and plans that had been carefully concealed. She observed the slight tension in David's posture, the deliberate pacing of his words, and the careful smile Olivia wore that seemed to mask concern beneath its polished surface, each movement and gesture conveying more than the casual tone of their conversation suggested. Margaret allowed herself a quiet moment to reflect on all the gatherings she had organized, the meticulous planning, the hours spent ensuring that each detail was attended to, and the unspoken expectation that her efforts would be noticed and appreciated, only to find herself piecing together now that those intentions had been manipulated, reframed, and redirected for purposes she was only beginning to understand. She traced the edge of her napkin with her fingertip, noting the slight crease that had formed, the subtle reflection of candlelight on the polished silver, and the way shadows stretched across the table, highlighting the invisible lines of separation that had been drawn over time. Margaret considered the countless evenings when she had been the steady center, arranging plates, pouring drinks, managing conversations, while maintaining a calm presence, and how the absence of acknowledgement now amplified the quiet tension, making the familiar surroundings feel charged with unspoken intent. She allowed a gentle exhale, steadying herself, observing the nuances of voice and gesture, the way Olivia's hand hovered briefly over a glass, as if deciding whether to reach for it, the subtle turn of David's head, a fleeting glance that conveyed both awareness and apprehension. Margaret's awareness expanded to the smallest details, the angle of the chairs, the positioning of utensils, the faint reflections in the glassware, each a signal of deliberate placement, an orchestration of appearances meant to convey normalcy while masking the underlying currents. She reminded herself that the power of observation lay in patience, in the accumulation of quiet evidence, and that each seemingly innocuous act contributed to a larger pattern that, when fully perceived, revealed intentions and priorities hidden beneath the surface. Margaret allowed her gaze to sweep the room once more, taking in the polished surfaces, the warm glow of the lights, the carefully arranged centerpiece, and she recognized the discipline required to maintain composure while absorbing the subtleties of the evening, understanding that insight came not from immediate reaction but from attentive observation. The faint tick of the clock punctuated the room, a steady measure against which she aligned her thoughts, and she recognized that patience, awareness, and quiet resilience were her greatest tools in navigating the complex web of family dynamics, that each small gesture, each carefully chosen word or pause, and each hidden glance contributed to a comprehensive understanding she was only now beginning to assemble. She rested her hands lightly on her knees, the polished surface beneath, her fingers grounding her, as she continued to observe, catalog, and interpret, drawing silent conclusions while maintaining the calm exterior that allowed her to watch, learn, and prepare for the revelations yet to unfold. Margaret let her gaze linger on the interplay of shadows across the room, the soft candlelight revealing the contours of the furniture while casting subtle highlights on Olivia's carefully composed expression and David's controlled posture, each nuance conveying more than their words could articulate. She sipped her sparkling cider, the glass cool against her palm, and allowed herself to absorb the rhythms of the evening, noting how Claire moved with purpose yet hesitated at certain moments, how Olivia's hands occasionally lingered over a dish as if considering what impression her actions created, and how David's eyes shifted ever so slightly when certain topics were mentioned, a hint of awareness that he did not fully reveal. Margaret reflected on the intricate layers of her family's interactions, the repeated patterns she had seen over the years, the subtle omissions and deliberate misdirections that now seemed to converge into a coherent, if troubling, picture. Each carefully orchestrated gesture, every half-formed sentence, every slight misalignment of the table setting became part of a larger puzzle, one that Margaret had begun to piece together with quiet patience. She traced the rim of her glass with her fingertip, feeling the texture of the crystal, and allowed herself to recall the countless hours spent ensuring that gatherings were welcoming, that the smallest details were attended to, from the precise folding of napkins to the careful arrangement of flowers, and how those gestures had always gone unnoticed, now standing in stark contrast to the subtle manipulation she sensed in the room. Her mind moved through each memory with precision, cataloging the lessons of observation, the ways in which she had learned to read the silences, the spaces between words, the unspoken intentions that hovered in the air like faint echoes. Margaret allowed a quiet, almost imperceptible smile to touch her lips, not of amusement, but of measured acknowledgement of her own acuity, the ability to witness and understand without immediate reaction, to transform patience into insight. The warmth of the candlelight on the polished wood of the dining table seemed to emphasize the clarity of her perception, each reflection and shadow marking the divisions between appearance and reality, between the facade maintained by her family and the subtle truths that she was now beginning to discern. She noted the positioning of the chairs, the placement of utensils, the deliberate spacing between individuals, each element contributing to a narrative that was as silent as it was revealing, and she recognized the power inherent in observing these details while remaining composed, grounded, and attentive. Margaret's breathing remained steady, each inhalation and exhalation reinforcing her focus as she quietly synthesized the clues and behaviors she had cataloged throughout the evening, understanding that the full picture was emerging gradually, and that her role was not to react impulsively, but to continue to gather insight with calm determination. The subtle hum of the air conditioning, the faint ticking of the clock, the occasional soft murmur of Claire in the kitchen, all served as a background against which Margaret measured and interpreted, converting each sensory input into understanding, each observation into a foundation for eventual clarity. She shifted slightly in her seat, allowing her dress to settle, her posture dignified and unhurried, and with the quiet confidence born of long experience, she continued to observe, to process, and to prepare for the moment when the careful accumulation of these small details would crystallize into undeniable understanding, all while maintaining her calm exterior and the patient authority that had long defined her presence within the family. Margaret shifted her attention slightly, following the subtle exchange between David and Olivia as they discussed household matters in tones low enough that only fragments reached her ears, yet each fragment carried meaning that her practiced observation quickly interpreted, revealing priorities and considerations previously hidden in plain sight. She watched the gentle flicker of candlelight on the silverware, the soft clink of glass as Claire placed another dish on the table, noting how every gesture seemed choreographed to maintain the appearance of normalcy, yet the small inconsistencies and fleeting glances betrayed a careful orchestration behind the scenes. Margaret reflected on the countless family gatherings she had hosted, each with meticulously planned meals, decorations arranged with precision, and conversations gently guided, and she recognized now how those efforts had been absorbed into the background, unnoticed and unappreciated, creating a contrast to the careful and deliberate manipulation she perceived tonight. She allowed her gaze to follow the faint movement of shadows along the walls, the subtle shift in expressions, the half-smiles that did not reach the eyes, and the way hands hovered momentarily before moving, a silent communication she had learned to read over decades of attention to detail. The warmth of the room, the subtle scent of herbs and baked bread, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, and the soft ticking of the antique clock combined into a canvas of observation, each sensory element providing Margaret with the context she required to interpret the scene fully. She permitted a measured exhale, steadying her thoughts, allowing the calm exterior to mask the intensity of her internal scrutiny, noting the placement of chairs, the alignment of plates, and the faint tension that seemed to ripple beneath the practiced smiles. Margaret's mind cataloged every interaction, every micro-expression, every unspoken cue, constructing a comprehensive understanding of the unacknowledged dynamics at play. While she remained composed, her body relaxed yet alert, her eyes tracing movements with quiet precision. She considered the implications of the small deviations she observed, how they hinted at intentions concealed under layers of civility, and the way subtle manipulations had been layered into what appeared to be ordinary interactions, each one contributing to a larger pattern she had been patiently piecing together. The faint shuffle of feet, the occasional clearing of a throat, and the soft rustle of fabric punctuated the stillness, providing Margaret with markers in her assessment, a rhythm that allowed her to track and interpret the unspoken hierarchies and priorities of the evening. She traced the rim of her glass lightly, observing reflections and subtle distortions in the polished surface of the table, realizing that the clarity of perception she cultivated in these moments was her tool, her means of understanding the reality behind appearances without interrupting the flow of the gathering. Margaret's awareness encompassed every detail, every nuance, and every fleeting expression, and she felt the quiet satisfaction of insight, the confidence that patience and attentiveness provided, knowing that the revelations of the evening would unfold in time, and that her role was to witness, comprehend, and prepare for the precise moment when all would become clear. The room remained softly lit, the hum of the household a gentle backdrop, and Margaret continued to observe with steady eyes, calm demeanor, and an internal focus that allowed her to translate the minutiae of movement and speech into a coherent understanding of the family's carefully constructed presentation and the subtle truths hidden beneath its surface. Margaret watched quietly as the evening stretched on, the shadows lengthening across the polished floor and the soft glow of the chandelier illuminating the delicate curves of the centerpiece, each candle casting reflections that danced on the glassware and mirrored the subtle shifts of expression on David and Olivia's faces. She observed Claire moving between the kitchen and the dining area, the gentle clink of utensils and plates creating a rhythm that seemed almost orchestrated, a cadence Margaret had learned to read as a reflection of underlying intentions rather than casual movement. Every gesture and glance, every pause in conversation, every carefully measured tone was noted silently, building a mosaic of awareness that Margaret held in reserve, understanding that the most potent revelations often came not from confrontation, but from patience and observation. The warmth of the room contrasted sharply with the cool detachment she sensed beneath the surface, a layer of performance intended to conceal truths that had been obscured for months or perhaps years, and she traced these patterns in her mind, correlating moments of hesitation, misaligned focus, and subtle misdirection with past experiences and familiar behaviors. Margaret recalled countless evenings spent preparing meals, arranging decorations, and attending to every detail to ensure family gatherings ran smoothly, realizing now that much of that labor had been absorbed into the fabric of expectation rather than met with genuine acknowledgement, and she considered how this evening mirrored the careful orchestration of appearances she had seen before, only more pronounced and deliberate. She allowed herself a steadying breath, feeling the glass in her hand cool against her palm, and she focused on the minutiae, the angle of a chair, the slight arch of a brow, the way a hand lingered over a napkin before moving, each small observation a piece of a larger picture that Margaret was slowly assembling with precision. Her attention to detail extended to the ambient sounds of the room, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the faint murmur of voices in the background, each auditory element providing context that reinforced the visual cues, creating a multi-layered understanding of the space and the dynamics within it. Margaret's mind cataloged each micro-expression, each subtle inflection, and each fleeting glance, interpreting the undercurrents of communication that had been cultivated over years of social navigation and family dynamics. And she recognized the power of her own restraint, the quiet authority of knowledge tempered by observation rather than overt action. She let her eyes wander over the carefully set table, the polished surfaces, and the soft flicker of candlelight, acknowledging the balance of order and subtle tension, understanding that her insight would allow her to discern intentions and behaviors without breaking the calm. And she held this understanding close, a quiet preparation for the revelations that would inevitably come to light. Margaret shifted slightly in her chair, the fabric of her dress brushing softly against the seat, and with measured patience and unhurried attention, she continued to watch, listen, and absorb, knowing that every detail collected tonight contributed to a full understanding of the complex, hidden truths that lay beneath the surface of her family's carefully constructed presentation. Margaret took a final slow breath, letting the quiet of the room fill her senses as she observed the subtle end-of-evening movements, the careful clearing of plates by Claire, the gentle repositioning of chairs by David, and the final glance of Olivia toward the centerpiece, each motion deliberate yet revealing, a silent conversation of intent and unspoken awareness. She reflected on the patterns she had observed throughout the evening, the accumulation of gestures, glances, and pauses that had formed a tapestry of hidden truths, each thread a piece of the story her family had sought to conceal in plain sight. And she acknowledged the clarity that came from patient observation, the quiet power of understanding without immediate interference. The soft tick of the clock marked the passage of time as she noted the alignment of silverware, the spacing of glasses, and the way shadows pooled across the table, emphasizing the separations that had been subtly constructed, while the warm light of the chandelier illuminated the polished surfaces and reflected the delicate contrasts of behavior she had cataloged throughout the gathering. Margaret's thoughts moved through the memories of years past, the birthdays, anniversaries, and holiday dinners she had carefully prepared, the countless efforts to maintain harmony, and the consistent absence of acknowledgement that had taught her the value of keen perception and measured patience. She allowed herself a quiet smile, a recognition of her own insight and the authority it provided, knowing that awareness and restraint were more powerful than immediate reaction, that the evening's lessons were gathered and understood without the need for confrontation, and that her comprehension of subtle cues now gave her a position of quiet strength. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of neighborhood activity underscored the tranquility of the moment, creating a backdrop against which every minor gesture and expression could be interpreted, a rhythm that allowed Margaret to synthesize the evening's observations into a cohesive understanding of intention and priority within her family. She noted how Claire's soft movements in the kitchen, the careful handling of plates, and the small hesitations conveyed more than spoken words, and how David and Olivia's subtle interactions with each other and the space reflected a deliberate management of appearances. Margaret allowed the sense of calm control to wash over her, her hands resting lightly on her lap, observing without distraction, cataloging each nuance, each silent exchange, and each minor deviation from expected behavior, recognizing the skill with which her family navigated social dynamics, while also acknowledging the transparency of the patterns that only her patient attention revealed. She considered the implications of each subtle gesture, the layered intentions, and the careful constructions of demeanor that had been present throughout the evening, and she allowed herself to feel the quiet satisfaction of insight, the recognition that her patience and careful observation had yielded a complete understanding of the hidden dynamics. As the final candle flickered and shadows deepened, Margaret sat poised, steady, and aware, holding within her the collected knowledge of the night, prepared to act or reflect as she chose, her composure undisturbed, her understanding complete, and the quiet authority of perception firmly established, allowing her to close the evening with the serene awareness that she had fully observed, fully comprehended, and fully appreciated the complexity of the truth that lay just beneath the surface of her family's carefully maintained presentation.